In no circumstance ever should the geopolitical sphere be treated as a game of whack-a-mole, and in the current political state, that is exactly what is happening. Third world countries are consistently shunned from the global stage, and the existence of BRICS actively works to change this. In my speech today, I'll be doing a few things. First, I'll be lightly retouching on the framework for the round, then I'll discuss the main clashes of the debate presented thus far, and lastly, I will be rebuilding our case by providing our last substantive for side opposition. As for framework, it is imperative to clarify our stance. We are not denying the existence of authoritarianism within these major players, but rather bringing emphasis to the fact that BRICS will allow for more political variability away from the West. Authoritarianism and BRICS are not one and the same, and the intergovernmental organization moving away from the clasp of Western jaws is absolutely necessary in order for individual country-level progression. On to some clashes then, the first one being geopolitical tensions. Side proposition argues that BRICS inherently causes geopolitical discourse and even states that the bloc has expressed support for a world independent of the Western Hemisphere within their first substantive. Our response to this is twofold. Firstly, BRICS does not openly advocate against the US or Western ideals, a key distinction that side prop seems to gloss over. Rather, they are simply building a forefront to an alternate network for the Eastern Hemisphere, shifting away from the one-size-fits-all mentality of the West. Secondly, the concept of an Eastern international organization that strives to help each other is directly beneficial. Better stated, a world independent of the Western Hemisphere should not be feared, but rather encouraged, especially in terms of economic progression. Having the entirety of the global stage dependent on the strength of the Western economy is harmful not only in the aspects of potential failure, but also Eastern individualism. This concept also goes back to the props case, in which they paid the proliferation of Western ideals to be harmful within their second substantive. As stated before, this point is inarguably null in terms of both realisticness and weighing, as the idea of independence from overbearing Western philosophy is not negative, and the amount of political variability that will be provided will always be more crucial. On to our second clash then, nationalist policies and totalitarianism. On their side of the house, the major point of spreading dictatorship ideals and policies currently stands on only one leg. Prop also continues to claim that BRICS is the root cause of the nationalist policies implemented around the world. As BRICS does contain the majority of the world's population, there is no debating that the countries within do hold some power. However, it is for this exact reason that side prop's point becomes insubstantial. Firstly, nationalistic policies cannot be blamed on BRICS, as regardless of their existence, these Eastern countries would still hold that degree of power that the West would fear. Secondly, the same principle can be applied to their point of authoritarianism ideals. It is unfair to label each country within BRICS as authoritarianistic, and countless countries outside of the organization are hardcore authoritarian regimes, regardless if they are with or without membership of an international organization. It is not our burden to debate what each country within BRICS does on their own accord, but rather what BRICS does as a collective. And it is important to note that as a collective, BRICS is not pushing an authoritarian agenda. On to some refutation then. Before I begin to rebuild our case, I'll be providing some refutation for the prop's third substantive. Their main argument here centers around the idea that BRICS is fundamentally unstable and lacks real power, and therefore it is unfit to be a leader on the world stage. Their point relies on the assumption that internal disputes within BRICS causes a lack of cohesion as one group and disproportionate authoritarian influence. Firstly, this point directly undermines the entirety of side prop's argument, as it contradicts their point regarding the potential harms of BRICS policies. Side prop fails to realize that if BRICS is inherently powerless, then why is the West afraid of them? Moving on, however, more importantly, both layers can be refuted on the sole idea that this is again non-unique to BRICS. Not only does every country hold different viewpoints and every intergovernmental organization have disagreements, but this also encourages political negotiation, compromise, and discussion. Arguing that BRICS is internally unstable is simply insignificant, as this argument could be made for each and every group that has ever held some degree of political influence. Secondly, the point of overpowering dictatorship influence within the group is once again non-unique. The comparison of the United States' influence on the global stage is a prime example of how power is unevenly distributed with no relation to BRICS. Although each country should be treated equally, the US naturally exerts more global influence on the world, and this phenomenon exists outside of the organization in numerous cases. On to our third substantive then, increased third world visibility. The existence of BRICS directly aids nations that rarely exert influence within the geopolitical sphere through both representation and protection. On to our first layer, then, like-minded understanding. Instead of so heavily relying on the hegemonic powers in the West, we propose more of the East helping the East concept, in this way fostering more cooperation and unity. A shared sense of understanding between these developed countries and BRICS will yield better results because they best know their own strengths and weaknesses. This means that we would see BRICS fostering partnerships to address issues with more tailored solutions. For example, BRICS has provided financial support to developing nations through initiatives like the New Development Bank, in which various infrastructure projects in South Africa, such as renewable energy initiatives, were funded. Within the South African Renewable Energy Program, the NDB provided loans to help build solar and wind power plants. By prioritizing regional cooperation over external intervention, BRICS fosters long-term economic resilience. The emphasis on South-to-South partnerships not only accelerates development, but also reduces reliance on Western aid, creating an overall more balanced world. On to our last layer then, mitigating developmental nationalism. When developing nations lack a strong international support, leaders often turn to nationalist and populist rhetoric to mobilize political backing. Without alternative sources of investment and economic growth, governments may resort to protectionist policies, blaming external forces for economic struggles. However, the increasing power, visibility, and recognition of BRICS on the world stage gives developing nations leverage in global affairs, ensuring that they are not marginalized, not only enhancing their bargaining power in international negotiations, but also this will allow political leaders to frame economic growth through BRICS as a key to development. Instead of resorting to nationalist slogans to gain support, leaders can highlight tangible benefits, offering voters a more constructive and inclusive vision for development. By providing a credible alternative to economic nationalism, BRICS reduces the likelihood of populist authoritarianism in developing nations. As leaders prioritize BRICS-driven development, governance shifts towards stability and long-term economic planning rather than reactionary policies. This fosters political cooperation, enhances regional integration, and ensures that economic growth remains a key focus rather than exclusionary or protectionist ideologies. In the long run, BRICS contributes to a more balanced, multipolar global order where development is based on collaboration rather than division.